Good morning, and welcome to Fridays with Frank, a lecture series sponsored by the Frank Church Institute at Boise State University. My name is Gary Wensky, and I am the Executive Director of the Frank Church Institute in the School of Public Service. The Frank Church Institute was established to honor the achievements and to carry forward the principles of Senator Frank Church. He delivered the first lecture on War or Peace, the American Role at Boise State University in 1982. Given today's challenges to democracies around the world, conversations like these are even more important. On behalf of the Frank Church Institute Board of Directors, our thanks to Oppenheimer Companies, C. Frederick Cornforth, and Community Development, Inc. for underwriting this series on how democracies survive and thrive in the 21st century. Today's guest, Senator Jon Tester of Montana, will discuss his book, Grounded, A Senator's Lessons on Winning Back Rural America. A third-generation farmer, Senator Tester served on his local school board and in the Montana Senate before his election to the U.S. Senate in 2006. He and his wife, Sharla, operate the same farm near Big Sandy, Montana, that was started by his grandparents more than a century ago. Senator Tester serves on the Appropriations, Commerce, Banking, and Veterans Affairs committees. Joining him is the senator's co-writer, Erin Murphy, who served as his chief of staff and communications director. Also joining the discussion is Peter Fenn, former chief of staff for Senator Church and a member of the board of directors of the Frank Church Institute. Let's begin with Peter Fenn.
Thanks very much, Gary. And thank you, Senator Tester and Erin Murphy for being with us today. This is, I think, a real pleasure to have you and to be discussing this unbelievably important book that you've written. Most of us who have some roots in the West understand what you're talking about, but I'm not sure the rest of the country, sadly, gets it. But I wanted just to start off, Senator, by saying, look, I don't know how somebody who is farming 1,800 acres in Big Sandy, someone who is getting up at 2:30 in the morning on Monday mornings to get to Washington to be a United States Senator, finds the time, but even the inclination to write this book. So I guess my first question is, what drove you to put all this down and to write so effectively?
Well, Peter, I got to start by saying something that's on my mind, and it deals with Frank Church. My folks, when they retired from the farm in 1978, moved north of Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. And Frank Church was a senator. And Frank Church is somebody that I never knew but have known for a long, long time. And to be on a program that came because of his service in the United States Senate, I just can't thank you enough for having me, and this is an incredible honor. So what caused me to want to write the book? Well, first of all, I'm going to tell you, you've got Erin Murphy on this, that was my communications director for a period of time, and then my chief of staff as a period of time. And Erin and I had talked about this over many number of years. He was my communications director when I first got elected, and then my chief of staff starting in 1917 and 2017 and 2018. I'm only a millennium behind. And we had talked about it, but more importantly, I think, Peter, I had witnessed, Murph had witnessed what was going on in rural America with Democrats. When I first got elected, we had two Democrats from North Dakota. We had two Democrats in South Dakota. The one just got beat the session before I got in. We had two Democrats from Arkansas. I mean, the list goes on and on. And over the years, we had witnessed those, what I would call basically rural states, their representation go from Democrat to Republican. And then you have to ask yourself the question, why? And I think that's what we addressed in this book is why are people in rural America turning their back on Democrats when in fact, from my perspective, Democrats are working harder for rural America than the folks on the other side of the aisle are. And I think what we came up to, what the conclusion was, is we don't talk to rural America. We don't let rural America know what we're doing. We don't let rural America know what our priorities are, what our values are, and what we fight for every day. We just make the assumption that rural America knows that. And quite frankly, there are folks on the other side of the aisle that are talking about things they're doing that, and it's fine, and I guess it's helpful, but in the overall scheme of things, does it really compare with family farm agriculture and consolidation in the marketplace? Does it really compare with making sure we have a vibrant K through 12 education system? Does it really compare with infrastructure? I mean, if we're going to compete with China, we got to have infrastructure. If we're going to compete with anybody, we have to have infrastructure. But we never talk about those things. And so that was the impetus for writing the book, Peter. Well,
you did a great job, and Murph, you obviously were a big help to this. I mean, I got a sneaking suspicion that the two of you finished each other's sentences probably by this time. But it was a great labor of love for you too, wasn't it, Murph, to do this?
Yeah, for years and years, I've heard stories from the senator's farm and family and parents and grandparents, and I kept saying to myself, this is a story. This is a story that America and rural America needs to hear. So when the time came, we like the senator said, we sat down and made it happen. But this is a collection of stories that if you are around Senator Tester, if you work for him, you've heard many of them. And then we added a few pieces of the book that I think are important histories of Montana's Copper King history and the influence of money and corruption in politics and how that formed to the modern Montana we know. Very colorful history, and Grounded, the senator's book, gets into some of that and actually includes some things that I have never read before. We did some really good research on it and found incredible stories, like a U.S. senator in Hamilton, Montana. He was a judge in Hamilton, and the legislature, which elected senators 100 years ago, couldn't come to a decision. And so they threw this guy's name in the hat and elected him and sent him to Washington. And he wasn't even a candidate. He didn't even know that he was elected a U.S. senator until he got a long distance phone call from Missoula, which was a rare thing in 1911. And that's in this book as well. So
yeah, it's a great history, and it's a great personal story too, Senator. One of the things that spending so much time with Frank Church in those grand old days, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, we paid so much attention to our rural counties. Frank Church used to go to every one of the 44 counties in Idaho and put his feet up on the desk in the courthouses and listen to every single person who would come into that room. And that connection, and it was harder to fly in and out and to get places even back then. But you've done the same thing. You stayed grounded to the people. But what is hard for a lot of folks, I think, is to look at some of the issues that we're facing and the alienation that people have out there, and trying to solve the problems. And I think you hit it right. And I'd like to hear you talk about this. You know, you said we're standing up for those people who take a shower at the end of the day, and you described your day on the farm. And you're taking, there are folks who, they're out there. They say, look, you want to buy your clothes at Nordstrom's? That's fine. Don't look down on me because I buy my clothes at Walmart. You folks like rock and roll music. That's terrific. But, don't degrade my love of country music. You guys like professional football? Well, I really, I have all kinds of other interests, but and I can't afford to go to a professional football game either. So I think that people are feeling that there are a lot of folks looking down on them and don't care about them. Whereas your point is we do, but we have to show it. And how do we show that?
Well, I think it's communication. It is fundamental in life. It's fundamental in marriage. It's fundamental in business. It's fundamental in politics. And I think you're right. If you don't communicate well, it creates a vacuum, and then that vacuum is filled with misinformation. And that's the truth. And so making sure that and by the way, it drives me crazy to do this, but it's something you have to do, and that is going out and talking about what you've accomplished as an elected official. I don't like bragging on myself. I like just saying, okay, we got this done and we figured it out. But unless you tell people, that, look, for example, right now, Grassley and I are working on a competition bill for agriculture. I think it's one of the main issues in agriculture. We haven't got it passed yet. We haven't even had a hearing on it yet. Okay, so we got a long ways to go. But the truth is, that's fighting for rural America. We lose our family farms and ranches in this country will change for the worst in a heartbeat. Our food security will become no longer secure. But it's not something that I drive into Montana and talk to people about all the time. I mean, we're in the middle of a pandemic, so that's usually taken up most of the air in the room. So, but you need to. And what's bigger than that is that oftentimes my side of the aisle, the Democrats, don't show up, and
Right.
that is the key to electoral politics. If you don't show up, you're written right off the map. And so you have to show up. You have to talk about what your vision is. You have to talk about what you've accomplished. You have to talk about what you're doing, whether that's uncomfortable or not, because sometimes you're going to hear that statement you made, Peter. You know what? You might like rock and roll. I like country. Okay. That's what I like. And don't badmouth me for that. Okay. Sometimes it gets a little more heated and a little more intense than just that. But the truth is that if you're not there, if you're not talking, and by the way, I shouldn't say that. If you're not listening first,
Right.
you have to listen. You got 2 ears, you got 1 mouth, act accordingly, listen. And not just listen, but listen. Hear what these folks have to say and try to put yourself in their shoes. Because quite frankly, they have concerns that are just as important as concerns of anybody else in the country. And if you're not there to listen, if you're not there to respond, then you can't expect them to vote for you.
Yep. I have to sort of, in the interest of full disclosure here, mention to our listeners that my son Dan and daughter-in-law Whitney Taney live in Bozeman, and of course Whitney, who in the Taney family. They're, I believe, 5th generation Montanans, so it's not like they just moved here yesterday. And they live in Montana for a reason. They love it, and Murph knows this so well from the work with the Montana Conservation Voters, where Whitney now works, and Western Conservation Foundation, where Dan works. And this is about a way of life. I mean, this is about respecting people of every stripe. This is about loving the land. And I have to say that the work that is so important these days, that's so interesting, and you go over it in your book. We almost won 1980 campaign in Idaho with Frank Church in that horrible year. And the reason he almost won that race was because he campaigned against what was then called the Sagebrush Rebellion. And these folks wanted to sell off the most beautiful open spaces in Idaho. And Steve Sims and others backed it until they found out that it wasn't as politically popular as they thought. But it's to me, this goes to the heart of values and what you care so much about. And once people know that you're not going to kind of wet your finger, put it up to the political winds and just, flip flop all over the place, and that you stand for something, then they'll give you a little slack. They'll say, I may not agree with you on this or that, but you're real, you're authentic. You do what you think is right. You tell me why. But you go into those places where they're about to hang in effigy because they're mad at you for something, and you listen to them, as you said. And that to me, so public lands, and you might want to just talk a little bit about it and how both of you, because how important it is to folks out in the West.
So I would just say this, Peter, and I know you're in Idaho, but your son and daughter all live in Montana. There's no other state like Montana in the lower 48. I'm going to tell you, it's got amazing ecosystems in it, and the reason it's got amazing ecosystems in it is because the work that our agricultural community has done, the work that our conservation community has done, the work of people like Bob Marshall that they did in decades in the past. That's why we have it. It hasn't happened by accident. It's happened because there's an incredible respect for the land, respect for wildlife, respect for water, clean air. And it's really important in elections. Why? Because you just can't go anywhere and see what you can see in the Bob Marshall Wilderness, for example, or in the Scapegoat Wilderness, or pick one, okay? And so when you're out there and you're talking about the fact that we need to pay attention to what we got here, because once it's gone, it may never come back. And you know, some people don't agree with me on that, and some people will say, no, you do everything to the maximum. I don't care. Everything will be fine. The truth is, if you're authentic and if you're straightforward and if you actually believe in what you're saying, people can pick that up so fast.
Mm-hmm.
If you're phony, if you wet your finger and stick it and see which way the wind's blowing before you make your statement, I'm going to tell you, I think they know this in rural America, but in urban America, but in rural America, they can pick you out of a crowd of 1,000. They know exactly what you are. They know what you're doing. And when push comes to shove, they won't be there, because people like authenticity. They like knowing that if you tell somebody and you look them in the eye, you shake their hand and you say, this is the way it's going to be because this is the way I believe, then they know they can take that to the bank. And if they don't agree with you, you can't get all the votes anyway.
Right.
They vote against you, but there's a large number, as you said, Peter, that will vote for you just because they appreciate that you're straight up with them.
Yeah, I told my class at GW for over 20 years that Americans, and it's gotten even more true, I think, Americans' BS detectors are real good, and they're even better in rural areas. The one thing that I think that is so important for all of us to understand both sides of the aisle is the need for bipartisanship. And you mentioned it with Grassley. Frank Church always used to tell us, when we came up with an idea for a piece of legislation, who do you have from the Republican side? Who's going to co-sponsor this? And if it turns out someone wants the credit, you give them the credit. And that's a hard thing, I think, because of our 24/7 news cycle, of everybody going to their own websites and watching Fox or watching MSNBC, and they all think they're in corners. You know, that's not the way a democracy should operate. And I think a lot of us are really concerned about this lack of folks getting together. And you know, do you see that changing now a little bit with Biden? Do you think there's going to be more bipartisanship and more action?
Well, Peter, you know, there's 20 senators that have been meeting since this Congress started, 10 Republicans, 10 Democrats. And I was very hopeful. I still am hopeful, but I'll tell you what doesn't help. It's when Mitch McConnell says, I'm going to do everything I can do to stop anything Joe Biden wants to get done. That's not how the system's supposed to work. Okay. Look at the policy for what it is. If you disagree with it, then vote against it. If you think it's a good policy, vote for it. But don't do it based on who's the sponsor is, for goodness sakes. I mean, that's just crazy. So I will tell you, I don't know if it's going to get better or not, but I have hopes that it will get better. Okay. I'm going to tell you, Peter, I've been here since 2007, and it hasn't been great since I've been here. And I think one of the reasons it hasn't been great, and I think one of the reasons it's gotten worse, is because of the amount of money in politics. Murph touched on it a little bit when he was talking about what happened, 100 years ago in Montana. And anytime you get money in politics and you get, like they did in the Copper King days, you got big companies that are buying votes. It's a problem. And we're not too far off that with the Citizens United decision of about nearly 10 years ago now, that quite frankly offers unlimited money, and it drives people to their corners. It drives people to the fringes. It takes away from the 70% that used to get done in the middle. Why? Because folks are looking over their right shoulder in a red state and their left shoulder in a blue state, because people are sitting there with $10 million they drop on your head and can take you out in a heartbeat when they might not even be able to pick out a state like Idaho or Montana on the map.
Yeah.
They got no interest. It's all about political agendas, and it's all about what their money can do to fix that agenda. So I'll tell you this. I think if we are able to get some of the money out, make it all transparent, get some of the money out of politics, I think you would start to see it back to the old days when Mansfield and Church and Metcalf were all in there and people were working together.
Yep, I agree with that. And Murph, you've seen this in your time, how much it costs to do these campaigns. Then last campaign for you ran senator, the total cost of Montana, I guess, was you put in the book, was $72 million. When the last campaign, which we thought was obscene for Frank Church, was $1.8 million, and we didn't know where the hell we were going to get the money. I mean, this is beyond insane. And I would just say it's one of the reasons that I started the Center for Responsive Politics and Open Secrets back in the early 80s. And when people ask me what, I say, well, it's worked out real well, hasn't it? I did a great job with that, didn't I? So, you know, I'm totally with you on this. And I just think it's, you know, it's you know, people around the world, the British, for example, they think we're nuts.
Yeah.
They don't understand what kind of a system we have here. I don't know. That wasn't the question really, but yeah, well, I'm passionate about it.
Peter, I'm going to tell you, it is insane. Take that, and by the way, exponentially, it doubles about every year now. Yeah. And I will tell you, take that money that's used on advertisements that aren't necessarily true, by the way, and put that money into public libraries, or put that money into paving roads, or broadband, or housing. I mean, there are so many needs in this country. Instead, we're building an infrastructure, and I've got a lot of friends in TV broadcast, but we're building an infrastructure in broadcast where these folks are working on 2-year cycles now, right, because their payday is during the election, and the rest of the time they're breaking even. And I'm telling you that that's not healthy. It's not healthy for the democracy. And the proof of that is the partisanship you see at every level of government now, from city councils to county commissioners to the state legislatures, to the United States House and the United States Senate. And it's not good for the country. And yeah.
How about HR 1? How about this legislation that you folks are marking up this week and then looking at it? I mean, obviously it's going to have a tough time passing the Senate, but you know, is that you think that's a good roadmap for people down the road?
Yeah, I do. I'm a co-sponsor of the bill because I think it does two things. It makes the money transparent in these elections, which is critically important. And it makes elections more user-friendly. You know, people have fought and died for my right to vote and your right to vote and everybody's right to vote. And if we want to limit people's rights to vote in this country, that is not good for democracy. As I pointed out earlier today on a Facebook thing that I had, a Facebook Live, democracies are not the rule if you look at history. Dictatorships are. Democracies are few and far between. If for a minute we think that this is, you know, kind of the way it's going to be, we don't have to worry about it, all I would say is look back at what the forefathers did for this country and what previous generations have done and what they've sacrificed to make sure that we have a democracy today. And if we're not smart, and if we don't treat it like it's a special form of government, because it is, we're going to lose it. And so it's really important that we fix this partisan issue, because it goes contrary to the way we operate as a democracy. It's important that we fix the money issue in campaigns, because it goes contrary to the democracy. And it's important that we fix the ability not to be able to suppress votes, but let's encourage people to vote. Voter fraud is a fraud in and of itself. And we need to make it easier for people to vote, not more difficult.
I totally agree. I know you got got to go, Senator, because you've got a lot of things on your plate. As you said in your book, you schedule in 15-minute increments. So I'm glad we got two 15-minute increments here. But the final question, and it goes to the heart of what you were just talking about. You stood up for veterans, unlike a lot of folks, and you really care about that. And these are folks that really that need someone in their corner. Can you just tell us what really drives you on that issue too?
I sure can, Peter, and thanks for asking. It started a long time ago. It started when I was a sixth grader, and I was asked by my bus driver to play taps at the funerals of then World War II and World War I veterans. It was a job called bugler, and it was a high honor to be the bugler for the VFW. It showed that you were one of the best trumpet players in town. And so when he asked me to do that, it was like somebody asking me to be governor of the state of Montana. Okay, it was a high honor. And so I did that, and in that process, I got to visit with many of the veterans, and they'd go into the VFW club and they'd grab their guns for the honor guard, and we would go through the ceremony ahead of time, and you know, they'd say present arms, now you play taps, okay? And after the 3 volleys, and I got to know these folks, got to meet them, and got to hear their stories, and got to hear about their sacrifices, and got to hear about their view of how war really is hell, and quite frankly, they were glad to be done with it, and how hopefully, you know, I remember sitting in the vehicle one time, this before the Gulf Wars had started, and I heard a Vietnam veteran say, you know what, maybe our numbers will start going down now. You know, maybe they'll start going down. And the truth is that we've been at war now for 20 years in Afghanistan, we're pulling out. But the truth is these folks have sacrificed a lot, not only them, but their family. And that level of respect that I gained as a bugler, playing taps at funerals, which quite frankly, I don't care if I ever go to another funeral again, but the truth is that it was an incredible honor and an incredible learning experience for a 12, 13, 14-year-old kid. And I got done, by the way, and I'm one that believes that I don't think any veteran should be laid to rest with a recording. And I've told many people, if you need a bugler and I'm there, I'll come in town and we'll polish off the old horn and play it again, because I just think it's one of the highest honors you can get. And it is something that every veteran should have if in fact they want those military honors. So I could go on and on all day long. And then, by the way, when I got elected to this job, I had a roundtable meeting. It was in the western part of the state. And I had a veteran stand up in the back of the room. And it was very forthright, just like those veterans in NOVFW Hall. And he pointed at me and said, you ain't going to treat this generation of veterans like you treated the veterans of Vietnam, you being a public official. And I'll tell you what, that hit home. That hit home, because I remember those soldiers coming back from Vietnam. I was younger, but the truth, I remember it, and they didn't get treated well. And so that's also been a motivation to make sure we do right by our veterans in these conflicts too.
Absolutely. That must have been an amazingly moving experience for you. And we thank you, Senator, for joining us today. And this was a wonderful time for us. And I look forward to seeing you again and out there in Montana when we go out and visit the kids, and back in Washington too, and Idaho. We hope to get you to Idaho, maybe to one of our dinners that we have over there for our good Democratic Party.
Good. Well, I will tell you, I've got all the testers left me. My oldest brother was a veterinary. He retired a few years ago, was a veterinary from the early 70s. And my middle brother retired out of the Montana Air National Guard, where he was a full medic for the most of his time after 35 years. And he retired in North Idaho too. So now that this, hopefully this pandemic gets in the rearview mirror, we'll be able to spend some time in Idaho. So
that'd be great. That'd be great. Well, thank you very much. And Murph's going to hang around, and we'll talk about a few things when you have to go to your next meeting.
Thanks, Peter. I'm going to bug out, but thank you all very, very much. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks.
You guys take care. And I guess you're supposed to say go Broncos, right?
Go Broncos! Blue field. They got a patent on that. You know, no one can put a blue field anymore.
Take care.
Thanks. Take care to you. That was great. Yeah, that Bugle story and his commitment to music is really a moving thing. And it's one of those things, I guess, Murph, it doesn't make any difference how many times you do it. You know, it's it hits you right in the heart every time.
Right.
And to have somebody there who cares about you, that means a lot for the family and friends.
Yeah, and it's probably a little easier for me to say this now that he's not here. But he spoke about authenticity, and what I want to convey to folks who are listening is that with Senator Tester, it's real. And I say that having worked for him, but there were a couple of examples, and they're in the book, that I think illustrate his commitment to authenticity in an unironic way that sort of goes against the grain of what's convenient for him in politics. And I won't ruin anything, but for example, there's a scene in the book about when he had to come to the decision about whether to confirm now Justice Gorsuch, and he asked his staff and then challenged him about being in election cycle. And that was so moving to me personally, because I was in the room, seeing a leader at that level honestly cast away his own political future to do what's best for the country. And then he did it again soon after that with Ronnie Jackson, who's now a congressman from Florida, but he was then the White House president's physician, and was nominated by the president to become the secretary of the VA. And without ruining anything in the book, but I do think it's a pretty enlightening chapter about where we are today with the polarization in politics and lies that are seen as truths to millions of people. What Senator Tester did in the most critical point of his entire career, when his entire political livelihood was on the line, to do what he did by bringing accountability to that situation. And my job was to, of course, as his chief of staff, to support him and make sure that the political environment was sound. And he basically came into us and he said, I'm going to do what's right here. And this is the reason I'm here. And elections, don't matter when I have this responsibility. And anyway, that it was just a really moving thing for me to be a part of. And that's part of the story that I think it's important to share.
Yeah, you got to look at yourself in the mirror at the end of the day. Mm-hmm. And what that, especially the Ronnie Jackson business did, was to so anger Donald Trump that he made 4 visits, I believe, into the state of Montana.
That record for any sitting president. And none of them, by the way, were meant to see rural America or to talk to people or to hear or be part of the country he serves. All of them were to go after Jon Tester by name specifically.
And very personally.
Yeah.
I mean,
very personally. Yeah.
It's this, I think, is the parallel that we see between Senator Tester and Frank Church. Mm-hmm. That you had people from tough states to get elected in as a Democrat, gotten increasingly tougher, as he points out. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to work on the wilderness bill in the early 60s, sure. Church was all there.
Yeah.
Wild and Scenic Rivers bill, all there. When it comes to standing up on Vietnam in 1965, when there were very few other people doing it, he learned an awful lot about Asia during World War II when he was an intelligence guy. Oh. When it comes to taking on the CIA, it was a subject that I'd like to talk to you a little bit about and like to talk to him about. Because, you vote against the Patriot Act.
Right.
The name. You did what? You voted against the Patriot Act? Well, yes, because, it's not terribly patriotic, to be honest with you, because it's invading Americans' privacy. But that's not easy stuff.
Right.
That's not easy stuff. And it's the old Hemingway definition of courage, grace under pressure. And I think you've got someone, you're fortunate enough to work for, who shows real political courage. And I think ultimately, in the history books, and even right now, that's what people want.
Right.
They want those kind of folks.
Well,
but what do you think? Tell me a little bit more about the Patriot Act, because I was on the Intelligence Committee, and boy, I tell you, that was tough stuff at the beginning.
Yeah. Well, it came at a very interesting time in Senator Tester's career. So he was a state senator and actually president of the Montana Senate, which is a citizen legislature like so many others. So he was a farmer and spent several months of the year in Helena, where he led the state Senate. And it was during that time, he was the Senate president in 2005 and 2006, when he was also running against then Senator Conrad Burns, who passed away. And there is a chapter in the book talking about their relationship. And I should add, without ruining anything, that it's a warm and fuzzy chapter, I think, at the end. But anyway, there was a debate here in Billings, Montana, where I live, between Senator Burns and Senator Tester, and the Patriot Act came up. And I think Senator Burns thought he had a moment where, he was wanting to get Senator Tester because he opposed the Patriot Act, and Senator Tester said something. It was one of the most quotable lines of that election in 2006, and it was, I don't want to weaken the Patriot Act. I want to repeal it. And that was back then a really controversial thing to say. And as he illustrates in the book, he got all sorts of calls from Washington basically saying, "What are you saying? You can't take that position." And he said, "Of course I can. That law goes against everything that I was raised with, that Montana stands for. And to this day, there is a very strong libertarian streak in Montana that rejects that accumulation of power that the Patriot Act tried to do and turn America into a police state in the name of security, but false security." And so that was a really compelling argument for a lot of people in the context of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, which people were tired of 15 years ago. And that populism that he brought to the table. And by the way, I say populism, but I want to completely separate it from the populism that we see today with certain factions of the GOP. That was a populism, I think, that really, truly represented people in the heartland. And that's how Senator Tester was reelected. Yeah,
and that is a different kind of populism than what we've seen in the last 4 years, unfortunately, which is in a sense an anti-democratic populism in my book.
Right.
But one of the things too, we had a question from one of our board members. She's served on the Board of Supervisors in a very large county for over 20 years, and they deal with the zoning issues a lot and with local taxes. And one of the things she was interested in was, how do we structure the tax laws and certain things on the state and local as well as the national level to see to it that we protect our family farms and that we see more farms built and not just more houses built. Right. And this is a tough issue because we're seeing them disappear in rural America, and we're seeing people out there being pretty angry over the fact that, wait a second, why can't you do more to help us? You got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, and again, these, I'm just representing what I heard for years from Senator Tester, and in the course of putting this book together, where he and I sat down together for hours and hours and hours, and he detailed all of the frustrations and the issues that he has been dealing with when it comes to the family farm. It is an 1,800-acre farm, which is small for standards in Idaho and Montana, but nonetheless, it's a family business, and it has his full attention. A lot of people think, oh, he's a farmer, he has help. He doesn't have any hired help. It's just him and his wife, Sharla, who run the farm. Occasionally, one of his brothers will come down and maybe help with the harvest, but that's rare. So, and that, by the way, is not something that's happening anymore at any scale, anywhere. And part of the issue, and again, this is illustrated in the book, is what these small scale farmers are wrestling with. A lot of them look at the land they work and look at it as a temporary stewardship of that land. And it's something that you pass down and take care of. And by the way, it's not something you necessarily own and conquer, but you cultivate and grow fruit from. So there's a lot of, I think, deep-seated anxiety about what the future is for family agriculture in this country, especially when you have these large multinational companies coming in and buying up these farms so that they consolidate them and turn them into food factories and basically remove people from the equation. And I think the way that the senator ends the book is again, without ruining it, I would encourage folks to look at it, but wrestling with that question, what happens after I'm gone? Because more and more kids these days aren't saying, yeah, I'll take over and be the fourth generation. That's not happening. Yet the world needs to eat. We still need to feed billions of mouths, and that food's got to come from somewhere. So there's a real existential question that I think is an important one for us not to forget.
And it may be something where you really do need to look at tax advantages for small farms, as well as a lot of people, buy up land and pretend they're cattle farmers and have cattle on them.
Right.
It's not terribly helpful.
Right.
And the other thing I think, which is interesting, is sustainable agriculture, which you talk a lot about in the book, and the not using pesticides and other things that we know are problematic.
Yeah, he termed it.
Hopefully we can begin to move in this direction. But as you say, it's hard when it's all about corporations buying it up. A couple other things, a lot of things actually that I've got on my list here, but I really be interested in your view. And what the senator feels about the election of Biden, whether we have now kind of gone from a chaos to calm, whether some people say, boy, it's boring having Biden as president. Well, we'll prefer boredom to craziness. Thank you very much. But whether we can move into actually solving some of these tough problems instead of just being a demagogue about them. And, I hate to be too pejorative about this. I mean, people have different points of view. We're listening to all kinds, but this was a rough 4 years, I think, for the country. And the hope is, Biden's latest polls show his popularity up into the 60s. That's pretty darn good for a polarized country.
Yeah.
And he's, all week he's meeting with Republicans in the Oval Office, bringing people in, and it is tough when you've got Mitch McConnell pushing back, as Senator Tester said. But there seems to be an opening here, and maybe we can convince people that bipartisanship is indeed possible. Right.
Well, and I'll speak to this from my previous role as his chief of staff, which was in the first 2 years of the Trump presidency, which was a very strange time, as you know, to be working in Washington, D.C. And I think it's really interesting that we look at the Biden presidency now and say, well, isn't it nice that, everything it just doesn't feel like it's a whirlwind of crazy news every day. It actually still is. It's just that we've been accustomed to 4 years of disaster after crazy tweet after some insult of somebody, and not really focused on what matters in this, not just country, but in the world. I mean, you have problems going on like the Middle East crisis is heating up again. You have cyber attack, perhaps from Russia on our pipeline. These are huge issues that I think are warning signs of what we really have to do to pay attention to the security and the well-being of our democracy, and to have somebody at the White House who actually can process that and surround himself with people who care and are impassioned about addressing those things and doing it in a bipartisan way, as long as all sides are wanting to care about this sort of thing. Right now, I guess they're kind of focused on whether to keep Liz Cheney in leadership, but those other problems are enormous. And to have a president focused on those things for us comes as a relief. And I know I speak for Senator Tester in suggesting that. From a policy perspective, I will say that it's still a really uphill battle, right? I mean, you mentioned H.R. 1, which is called the For the People Act, very important piece of legislation. And Senator Tester is a co-sponsor of it. But you mentioned this, passing it through the Senate is going to be a really, really tricky deal. It's an important bill, as so many of them are, but in order to really pass things and to work with both sides, which Senator Tester does and does very effectively, we're going to have to find common ground and get stuff done in the middle. And I think with people like him and with some folks on the other side willing to work with people like him who care more about what's best for the country than getting reelected, I think we'll get somewhere.
Yeah, I think that's the key. And that's the difference between the time many of us worked for Senator Church and during that period was that you had northern moderates and liberals on the Republican side. You also had southern Democrats who were very conservative, who were hard to corral. But you did work across the aisle a lot better than you do now. Even in the era of Reagan, he was not a right. He was a tough one to work with. But the one thing that as Democrats said, it was always Will Rogers that got to me because he said, "I'm not a member of any organized political party. I'm a Democrat," and that was one of his good lines from the way back in the 30s. And then we used to refer to the Democrats as a circular firing squad. But it seems to me that what we're seeing a little bit, Murph, is the Republicans are taking up that crazy mantle now, and that maybe we will see some of this. But it used to be the filibuster. I mean, we would pass legislation with 53, 54, 55 votes. Everything didn't have to get 60 votes. Right. Now we're in that situation where if you want to rename a post office, you need 60 votes. Come on.
Right.
So we're gonna have to work our ways through a lot of this minority rights versus minority rule. Right. And it's a hard one. It's a really hard one when you're at 50-50, no doubt about it.
Right. With a pretty tenuous political landscape in 2022, right? I mean, if they change all the rules and then it switches again in a matter of months, then boy, it's going to be a very strange time in Washington.
And one of the things that folks talked a lot about, and I'd be curious, I don't know if Senator Tester ever sleeps, to be honest with you. He's the kind of person that he's easy to talk to, right? I know whatever side of the aisle you're on, and you're going to get a straight scoop with him. But the thing that is hard now is people aren't around each other.
Right.
They don't have as much time to socialize, especially during the era of COVID. Naturally.
Right.
But one of the things that you would see in past years, and maybe we'll get back to it, is real friendships.
Right.
As we were discussing before this call with your dad's friend, Senator Simpson, who was a great friend of Church's and went to his bedside when he was dying of cancer. I mean, it didn't matter if he had an R or a D after your name. You trusted these people. You liked these people. And you also, a lot of you came out of World War II together.
Right.
There was that they were bonded by that. And I wonder, I wonder what your thoughts are on that, just that personal side of things.
Well, and it's funny you say that, because we were just talking about Senator Alan Simpson of Wyoming, and that's one of the things he says to this day, that one of the reasons that I don't want to say he left, but one of the things he noticed after he left was the fact that those friendships, have gone away. And a lot of it has to do with the previous discussion we were having about raising money for a political campaign. Back in the 80s, it was okay to stay in Washington and have dinners with other members and their families and get to know them and create real friendships. And so that when the hard work of piecing together a complicated bill came, you would have built trust. Now it's important for folks to go back to their districts, their states, which is very important. Don't get me wrong. And Senator Tester does it up until COVID every single weekend. But that diminishes the value of building those friendships. But I will say that there are exceptions, and Grounded talks about this. Senator Tester enjoyed a real friendship with Senator Johnny Isakson, who retired now, but he was the chairman of the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee when Senator Tester was the ranking member. And during the Ronnie Jackson ordeal, Johnny Isakson and his committee knew darn well what was going on. They were receiving the same intel, and through it, it was fascinating to follow, because through it, you could just see the respect for each other through that whole process in the context of a very divided and partisan political campaign. But there was a real friendship there. And I know those friendships exist. I just think it's harder and harder these days for that friendship to translate to actually getting stuff done, which is what they're all there for.
Well, and it was true that oftentimes you were on opposite sides on something, and you'd get on that floor and, you'd be giving speeches where actually people were there listening.
Right.
That happened way back. But you'd go tooth and nail on an issue, and then the vote would be taken, and you'd win or you'd lose. And then you'd sit down with the person that you're arguing with and saying, okay, what are we going to do on agriculture? What are we going to do on veterans affairs? What are we going to do on public lands? Yeah. I mean, folks would be very open about why their friendships were important. And, some people called it a club and gentleman's club and all that kind of stuff. But, it worked pretty well when people got along. So, I mean, that's, but, sound like an old guy here. Well, I guess I am. But, I think, and I remember when my son Dan worked for Mark Udall in his office, who was just a wonderful senator, wonderful human being. And they asked me to come up and talk a little bit about upcoming campaigns and about the time in the Senate. And what I heard from a lot of those staff members was, God, we worked so hard. We worked 6 months on a bill. We got Republicans to support us. We think and then it got deep sixth. And then, all this hard work went for nothing. And that, for a staff person, and you can speak to it much better than I, obviously, more recently, it's really tough to keep people interested. So they say, oh, well, I might as well quit. I'll go down and work on K Street or whatever. Yeah. But, that's hard in an environment like this, it seems to me.
Yeah, and I will say that at the staff level, and this is talked about in the book as well, when Senator Tester was, I don't want to say he was tasked with writing the bill, but he took the opportunity of writing the Dodd-Frank Reform Act, which is now law. And doing so, he had to work with a bunch of moderate Democrats, many of whom were also up for reelection, and then some moderate Republicans as well. And together, they cobbled this bill together. And I remember very clearly Senator Tester's lead in the Banking Committee would spend 20 hours a day working with Republican staffers and Democratic staffers to take what their bosses directed them to do, good ideas here, there, and cobble them together into a piece of legislation. And that was really heartening to see that process, because if you were to just watch cable news all day, you wouldn't see that stuff happen. And maybe since I left, it doesn't happen as often as it did, but I saw it happen. And I guess I'm saying that as a little bit of hopefulness, because I don't think that things are coming to a standstill because of a system that is failing. I think they're coming to a standstill because of personalities who have been elected, who want to destroy things, and to a media cycle that I think perpetuates a whole bunch of things, right or left, but I don't think that they're in the interest of telling people what they need to know, but rather shooting for those ratings eyeballs, which are worth a lot of money. So just my personal opinion there, but I do think at the end of the day, the days of real collaboration, getting stuff done from smart people who truly want to do right for the country, even if they disagree with each other, and work for members who have very varied beliefs and diverse backgrounds and worldviews and perspectives. I think that can still happen, and it does. It's rare, and it shouldn't be rare, but it's there, and I think that's something to be proud of.
I totally agree, and that's why, as John Kennedy said, politics is a noble profession because it involves that, and as you put so well, I mean, we are into the politics of personality, mm-hmm. instead of the politics of ideals and issues, unfortunately, in my view, and we got to get back to that. And Frank Church, one of our board members, reminded us the other day we were talking about it. Frank Church used to say, "Hey, if I have to, I'll take half a loaf. I don't want to. I want the whole loaf, but I'll take half a loaf. Yeah. Then I'll come back for another 20% of the loaf, and then another 20%, and I'll just keep working at it. That's all. But I'm not gonna give up the fight, and I'm not gonna take my ball and my football and go home.
Right.
That's not what this is all about.
Right.
And I do think, fundamentally, if we have a party, two parties that are strong, and I hope we do. I hope the Republican Party does get their act together. Yeah. If they want to have debates about how to spend money and balance budgets and where it should go, that's fantastic, and that's what we used to have. Right. If you want to talk about how to have a strong national defense, what that costs, where we should put the emphasis, let's have those discussions and debates.
Right.
Large government, small government, you want to have those kinds of discussions. They had them in 1779, 1789. I mean, this is like, we've been doing this the whole time.
Yeah.
But let's not go into the politics of rancor and personality and anti-democratic stuff. I mean, we watch that in other countries. We're supposed to be the beacon.
Well, we watched it in this country on January 6th, and that's one of the things where I saw Senator Tester stand up, and he was at his firmest after that happened, because what happens when you let all of that craziness go unchecked is you get a insurrection. And that we saw it, and it was very scary. And thank goodness it wasn't worse than it was. But that was a very loud warning siren that we all need to pay attention to, because when the politics of personality and the wild conspiracies that orbit that get out of hand, we could lose our democracy. It is fragile.
It is fragile. You're absolutely right, Murph. And that's the whole point of the Church Institute now. And that's why we're trying to work on this. And as you and I have talked about before, we're going to do focus groups. We're going to do some polling emphasizing where folks in rural America and the Intermountain West, where they think things are going and what they think should be done about it, and what are the solutions, and how do we put this all together. It's fragile. And, for someone like you who's spent a lot more time recently in those halls, to watch the defacement of that building and the murder of the death of 5 people, it brings tears to your eyes. And I, hopefully we'll have tears of joy down the road, not tears of despair. So,
right.
But, boy, it's thank you so much for joining me and doing this. I really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure.
Get going, and I really appreciate the senator taking his time too. And and being a part of this Fridays with Frank, as we call it. So
I do believe one of Senator Tester's first offices in the Russell Building used to belong to Frank Church. That was one of the very first press releases I wrote for him back in 2007.
Well, I can tell you the number. 40 years later, 245.
I think that was it. And it was also John
number.
Anyway, it's a pleasure and it's an honor, and thanks to you and to Gary and I speak for Senator Tester when I say thank you to you and the work that you guys do. So
thanks a lot. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
On behalf of the Frank Church Institute, our thanks to Aaron Murphy and Peter Fenn for this most interesting and relevant discussion. Note Senator Tester's book, Grounded, is available at Rediscovered Books in Boise and on Amazon. Finally, if you appreciate these sessions, please go to the Frank Church Institute website to make a contribution. Thank you.